I stood in the entryway of my own home, gripping the handle of my rolling suitcase, staring into a living room that no longer existed. I had just returned from a 4-day regional management seminar in Chicago. I am 62 years old, a widow of 7 years, and I prefer predictability over surprises. But the silence in my house that Thursday afternoon was the wrong kind of quiet. The heavy oak console table that usually held the mail was gone. The floral sofa I had purchased with my late husband Thomas was gone. The vintage wool rug, the floor lamps, and the framed landscape paintings had vanished. I did not drop my bags. I did not gasp or fall to my knees. I simply walked forward, my sensible heels clicking sharply against the bare hardwood floors. The echo was entirely unfamiliar in a house I had lived in for 3 decades. I moved into the kitchen. The dining table was missing, replaced by a massive hollow space. The only object left in the entire room was resting dead center on the granite island, a plain, white envelope. My name, Maureen, was written across the front in a looping, overly stylized cursive. I recognized that handwriting instantly. It belonged to my daughter-in-law, Sarah. My son David and Sarah had moved into my guest rooms 8 months ago under the guise of saving for a down payment on their own place. I picked up the envelope. The paper felt heavy, deliberate. A lesser woman might have panicked, imagining a burglary. But burglars do not leave perfectly sealed letters on kitchen islands, nor do they take the time to sweep the floors after removing heavy furniture. I slid my finger under the flap and pulled out the single sheet of paper. As I read the first line, the reality of the situation locked into place. They had not been robbed. I had been managed. And they were about to learn a very hard lesson about whose house this actually was. Dear Maureen, we wanted to surprise you. The letter began with the kind of forced cheerfulness Sarah used when she was getting her way. I set the paper down for a moment, letting the memory of the last 8 months wash over me. I am not a fool, but a mother's desire to help her son can sometimes blur the sharpest edges of her intuition. When David asked if they could stay for a year to build their savings, I agreed. I set clear ground rules: they buy their own groceries, keep the upstairs tidy, and respect my routine. For the first few weeks, it was fine. Then the creep started. It was never a confrontation. It was a slow erosion of my space. I would come home from the office to find my pantry reorganized to suit Sarah's aesthetic. My preferred brand of coffee was pushed to the back, replaced by her expensive espresso pods. When I moved my things back to the front, Sarah sighed heavily and complained to David about how set in her ways I was. David, who has always taken the path of least resistance, simply looked at his shoes and mumbled apologies. 2 months ago, the hints began. Sarah started leaving brochures for active adult retirement communities on the coffee table. She made offhand comments about how a woman my age shouldn't have to manage a 4-bedroom house. She talked about how the master suite, my bedroom, had the best light for a potential nursery. I never argued. I simply threw the brochures in the recycling bin right in front of her. I thought my boundaries were clear. I thought my silence communicated that I was not moving an inch. But as I stood in my empty kitchen, I realized Sarah had mistaken my quiet tolerance for weakness. She assumed that because I did not yell, I would not fight back. She had spent months assessing my home, treating it as an inheritance she was simply claiming early. She had miscalculated entirely. I picked the letter back up and read the rest of Sarah's looping script. Since you're getting older, we realize this big house is just too much for you to maintain. We've taken the liberty of decluttering the old, heavy furniture to modernize the space. We've also moved your belongings down to the finished basement. It will be so much cozier for you and no stairs to climb every day. We're taking the master suite to prepare for our future family. We'll be back from our weekend trip on Sunday to help you settle into your new basement suite. Love, Sarah and David. I walked down the hall to my master bedroom. The door was wide open. My heavy mahogany bed frame, the matching dressers, and the cedar chest Thomas had built were all gone. In their place sat a sleek, modern beige platform bed and several sealed boxes labeled Sarah's Closet. I walked to the basement door and looked down the stairs. My clothes were stuffed into black garbage bags piled carelessly on the damp linoleum floor next to the water heater. I felt a cold, hard knot form in my stomach. I did not cry. Crying is a biological response to grief, and I was not grieving. I was calculating. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. 8 months ago, I had opened a joint household checking account to make it easier for them to pay their share of the utility bills. I kept a buffer of about $4,000 in there for emergency household repairs. I tapped on the account balance. It read $12.50. There was a withdrawal from yesterday afternoon for $3,987.50. The transaction note read, Vintage Furniture, Emporium, and Hauling. They had used my own emergency fund to pay a company to remove my belongings and fund their weekend getaway while I was out of town. I closed the app. The calculation was complete. The time for tolerance was over. Action is the only cure for disrespect. I walked to the kitchen, opened the one cabinet Sarah hadn't emptied, and pulled out my personal stash of tea. I boiled water in the microwave, made a cup, and sat on the kitchen counter. I made 3 phone calls. The first was to my bank. I instructed them to close the joint checking account immediately and transfer the remaining $12 to my primary single-owner account. I also went online and removed David's car from my auto insurance policy, a luxury I had been covering since he was in college. My second call was to Arthur, a retired handyman who lived 3 blocks over and had served with Thomas in the local Rotary Club. I need all 4 exterior locks changed today. The deadbolts, too. I'll pay double your usual rate. Arthur arrived within 30 minutes carrying his heavy red toolbox. He took one look at the empty living room, raised an eyebrow, but asked no questions. That is the beauty of competent people. While Arthur changed the locks, I went to work on the bedrooms. I grabbed the heavy-duty contractor trash bags they had used for my clothes. I carried them upstairs, emptied my clothes onto my bare bedroom floor, and took the empty bags into the guest room they had been occupying. I packed Sarah's expensive cosmetics, her designer shoes, and her silk blouses. I packed David's gaming console and his golf clubs. I did not fold anything. I simply loaded the bags and hauled them to the front porch. By 4 p.m., Arthur handed me a set of 3 shiny, new brass keys. I paid him in cash. I walked through the house, double-checking every window latch. I moved Sarah's automated espresso machine onto the porch alongside their garbage bags. The house was empty of my furniture, yes, but it was finally empty of them, too. I spent Friday and Saturday in my hollow house. I slept on a camping mattress I found in the garage right in the middle of my master bedroom. I read books. I enjoyed the absolute silence. Sunday afternoon arrived with a gray, overcast sky. At exactly 3:15 p.m., David's SUV pulled into the driveway. I stood by the window, a cup of tea in hand, watching them. Sarah hopped out of the passenger side, holding an iced coffee, pointing at the house and talking animatedly to David. They walked up the porch steps, completely ignoring the black plastic bags stacked to the side, assuming they were just yard waste. David pulled his key from his pocket and slid it into the front door. He turned it. It didn't catch. He tried again, jiggling the handle. I unlocked the deadbolt from the inside, turned the handle, and stepped out onto the porch. I stepped entirely outside and pulled the door firmly shut behind me, hearing the satisfying click of the auto lock. Mom David smiled, looking slightly nervous. "You're home early. We were going to be here to help you unpack downstairs." Sarah stepped forward, her fake smile plastered on her face. Surprise Marine. Do you love the open concept? We really felt the house needed to breathe. Your new space downstairs is going to be so cozy. I looked at Sarah, then at David. I did not raise my voice. I pointed to the 6 heavy black contractor bags leaning against the brick railing. Your things are packed. I suggest you load them into the SUV before the rain starts. Sarah's smile vanished. Excuse me, what are you talking about? The locks have been changed, I stated, keeping my eyes locked on David. Your residency here is terminated. You have 10 minutes to clear your property from my porch. David blinked his face, flushing dark red. Mom. Wait, you can't just kick us out. We live here. All our stuff is inside. Your personal items are in these bags, I corrected him smoothly. The modern bed frame you placed in my room will be disassembled and left on the driveway next Wednesday for bulk trash pickup, unless you rent a truck to retrieve it before then. Sarah's face contorted into an ugly, furious mask. You can't do this. We put so much work into modernizing this dump. We paid for the hauling. We have rights. You used my emergency fund to pay for the hauling? I replied, my tone flat. I reached into my cardigan pocket and pulled out the white envelope she had left on the counter. I held it out to David. He took it with a shaking hand. I closed the joint account on Thursday. I also removed your vehicle from my insurance policy. If you drive that SUV off this property, you are driving uninsured. David stared at the envelope as if it were a bomb. Mom, please. We don't have anywhere to go. We spent our savings on the trip and the new bedroom set. That sounds like a severe budgeting error, I observed. You took $4,000 of my money. Consider that your severance package. Find a motel. Sarah stepped up, invading my personal space, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. You selfish old woman, we were trying to help you. You're going to die alone in this empty house. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I looked right into Sarah's eyes and delivered the truth she couldn't handle. The house may be empty, Sarah, but it is mine. You have 8 minutes left. They left. It took them 15 minutes of frantic, angry shoving to fit the garbage bags into the SUV. Sarah shouted insults out the window as David backed down the driveway, looking thoroughly defeated. I went back inside, locked the door, and slept beautifully. The next morning, my oldest friend Joanne came over. Joanne is a woman who knows everything that happens in a 5-mile radius. She walked into my bare living room, handed me a pastry, and whistled. Well, the Wicked Witch really cleared you out, didn't she? She left the refrigerator, I noted, pouring us coffee. I did some digging. Joanne smiled, a wicked glint in her eye. Sarah's been bragging to the girls at the salon about how much money she made selling your antique junk. She took it all to Miller's consignment off Route 9. I finished my coffee, grabbed my purse, and drove to Miller's. Mr. Miller recognized me immediately. I walked through the crowded aisles until I saw it, Thomas's worn leather recliner sitting in the corner. I ran my hand over the armrest. I also saw my dining table marked up to an absurd price. I went to the counter. I pulled out 4 crisp $100 bills from my emergency cash envelope, the real one, the one I kept hidden in a hollowed-out book, not the bank account. I'll take the leather recliner, Jim, I said. Maureen, your daughter-in-law brought that in. Said you were downsizing. He looked confused. My daughter-in-law is a fiction writer, Jim. I'm buying my chair back. Keep the dining table. I never liked polishing it anyway. I arranged for him to deliver the chair that afternoon. I drove home feeling lighter than I had in years. I didn't need the heavy furniture. I just needed my peace. By Wednesday, my phone was full of voicemails. David had called 4 times. The first 2 were angry, fueled clearly by Sarah standing over his shoulder. The third was a pathetic attempt at bargaining. The fourth was just sad. Mom. We're at the Motor Inn on 4th Street. It's terrible here. Sarah is crying all the time. Can we just sit down and talk about this? We can put your room back the way it was. I deleted the voicemails. I do not negotiate with people who steal my comfort and disguise it as a favor. Later that evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. You kept my Vitamix blender. That is my property. You are a thief. Leave it on the porch tomorrow or I'm making a public post about how you abuse your family. I typed my response carefully. I did not defend myself. I did not argue. Saturday, 9 a.m. The driveway. I will place the blender and the disassembled pieces of your beige bed frame outside. Anything left after 9:15 a.m. goes to the Salvation Army. She replied immediately. We can't fit a bed in the SUV. You need to let us store it there until we get an apartment. I read the message, turned on the Do Not Disturb feature on my phone, and went to sit in Thomas's leather recliner. The living room was spacious, airy, and entirely mine. I watched the evening news without anyone complaining about the volume. I went to sleep in the guest room, secure in the knowledge that I controlled the perimeter of my own life. Saturday morning arrived crisp and clear. At 7 a.m., I dragged the disassembled pieces of Sarah's modern bed frame out of the garage and stacked them neatly at the end of the driveway. I placed the heavy Vitamix blender in a cardboard box right next to it. At 8:55 a.m., the SUV screeched to a halt at the curb. Sarah jumped out, her face red and puffy. She marched up the driveway, grabbing the blender box. David got out slowly, staring at the pile of wood and bolts that used to be their bed. How are we supposed to move this? Mom, David asked, his voice cracking. We don't have a truck. That is a logistics problem, David. I replied calmly from the porch steps. It is no longer my problem. Sarah spun around. You are the most heartless woman I have ever met. We were just trying to help you. You're old. You don't need all that space. I walked down the steps and handed David a sealed envelope. He looked at it terrified. What is this? He whispered. It is an itemized invoice, I explained. It lists the appraised value of the dining table, the sofa, the bedroom set, and the console table your wife sold behind my back. It totals roughly $14,000. I am not asking you to pay me back. David looked relieved for a split second before I finished my sentence. I have forwarded a copy to my financial planner. That $14,000 plus the $4,000 you took from the emergency account will be formally deducted from whatever inheritance you thought you were entitled to. You took your advance early. Spend it wisely. A month has passed since that Saturday on the driveway. They managed to strap the bed frame to the roof of their SUV, scratching the paint terribly in the process. I didn't stay outside to watch. I went back in, locked my door, and made a pot of tea. I have spent the last 4 weeks making the house truly mine. I hired painters to cover the drab beige Sarah had chosen for the hallway, replacing it with a warm, cheerful yellow. I bought a small, comfortable love seat for the living room instead of a massive sofa. Joanne comes over on Tuesdays, and we sit in the open space drinking wine and doing crossword puzzles. David stopped by once last week. He stood on the porch, looking exhausted. He told me they had rented a tiny apartment on the other side of town and that Sarah was furious about the budget. He looked at me, waiting for an invitation to come inside, waiting for me to fix it. I smiled, handed him a thermos of hot coffee, and patted his arm. Good luck, David. I did not open the door wider. I did not let him cross the threshold. When you allow people to convince you that your boundaries are an inconvenience, they will take everything you have and tell you it was for your own good. I am a mother, yes. But I am also a woman who owns her own home, controls her own money, and decides who gets to sit at her table. Even if I have to buy a new one to do it.